Hi everyone, and thanks again for joining me on this episode of Sealed for Good. And today I'm going to talk about waterproofing on concrete blocks. It is still one of the most common substrates in the market. We see it used everywhere in construction, and it often is a challenge with waterproofing because unlike other surfaces, it does behave a little bit differently. And so there's some important things to understand when you are dealing with concrete blocks and waterproofing. Very common building substrate, often used for retaining wall applications, we'll see it, planter boxes, we see it, water tanks. These are three critical areas where you get high volumes of water, and if you're not preparing the surface properly and not treating the waterproofing membrane the way it needs to be handled, you'll come unstuck. So firstly, let's talk about, this is a common one which comes up with retaining walls, and it's the core filling between the retaining wall of the mortar joints, where you have a concrete core filled internal of the block cavity, and what that can do to affect the membrane application. Well, firstly, from our membranes applications, normally it's not an issue because we can go on damp substrates based on the fact that as long as one side of the wall can still enable the evaporation of moisture. Now, if you are doing applications which are, obviously let's talk about retaining walls, as I just mentioned, where you have a situation of the sun hitting the external face of the wall where the membrane is going, if there's a lot of heavy moisture in that wall, you could have the potential of blistering with the membrane. But it's very unusual, particularly with the systems we have, which I'll go through in a moment. But if you have a membrane that is subject to blistering and bubbling and is very sensitive to that, then you'd need to use a vapor barrier membrane like our E60 over the top. If you're using one of the cementitious membranes, which I'll speak about in a moment, you won't need that. The other piece is moisture vapor under pressure that can cause that blistering. So let's say that you had a retaining wall and one side was, only the side that was going to be treated with a membrane is where you're going to get the evaporation of moisture. Then you may need to wait longer and measure the retention levels. Now, a lot of you are going to say, well, Phil, I don't have a measuring equipment on how we're going to measure the moisture levels on a concrete block. If you don't have that intricate apparatus and equipment on site, there are some simple hacks on this one. Cut yourself a thick sheet of plastic, clear, with duct tape or gaffer tape, a square metre, a couple different random spots on the wall, and tape them to the wall and let the sun hit them, and then understand from the condensation levels that are coming through. If you see that the condensation is happening under the plastic, you've got moisture in that wall, it needs to evaporate out. That will give you a quick hint to let it dry for another day or two. And this is only for membranes that are sensitive to blistering again, and also ensuring that it's a membrane that breathes. So this brings me to the next point. We recommend on our systems two of our membranes which have never let us down, the Gripset C1P, the Gripset 2P. Firstly, they've got very good moisture vapor resistance. Secondly, they breathe, so they won't blister. So they work very well on a retaining wall. You can either, the C1P doesn't need to be primed, obviously a damp surface works very well. The next piece, if you do need to prime, you could use our GP primer, or you've got our 11Y slurry in the most difficult of circumstances. But normally you would not need a prime with the C1P, 2P, GP, or the 11Y slurry. But they are two membranes that are robust, quick drying, because these environments with retaining walls hold a lot of dampness. Some of you would know that at certain times of the year you're in a cavity or a ditch, it's shady, it's damp, it's moist, no sun hits there, and you're waiting for things to dry. That is where the C1P and 2P helps, because it will cure even if there's no sunlight, and very, very minimal warmer temperatures for you to enable the curing process to happen. Guess what I'm going to talk about next? Surface preparation. Okay, this is the one that still comes unstuck, and I don't know why people think they're doing underground walls and they don't need to treat walls with the correct surface prep. Surface preparation on blocks is so important. The reason being is that this is an extremely porous surface, and this is a decent block. There's a lot more with open pores in them. Secondly, it's the joints of the blocks. And what happens is that if you've got a membrane going over the blocks where they've got a lot of pinholing and a lot of undulating, like if I'm running my hand across this now, I can virtually feel the pores in that concrete block. I need to ensure that that is not going to impact the type of membrane I'm applying. Now, membrane like the C1P and the 2P, there's no issue directly over that surface for the fact that the fine sand that we've got in those membranes will take up that pinholing effect. But if I'm using a membrane that's a liquid membrane, like a Gripset 51, or I could be using another type of membrane that's suitable for underground areas, with no filler content, you might be able to roll it on and go, oh, it's nice and thick on there, and what happens is the pinholings will suck it up and they will actually form weak points in your membrane finish, and that's when you're going to have an issue. So really important to understand the type of membrane you're using and the surface prep. Now, if you've got a situation where you are using a membrane that's subject to pinholing, products like our Gripset OP with a fine particulate in there, or the 11Y slurry, even better, you broom it over there, that slurry, the sand particles sit in those pores and allows you to put that liquid membrane over the top. The other bit is, which is the one that irks me the most, and I see it so often still, and it sort of reflects that I've got an amateur on the site, is when they go over rough mortar snot joints or snots on the wall, or large voids in the mortar joints. And you know, I've seen guys cake on product onto these surfaces thinking they're going to bridge it. They walk away thinking they've done a great job, the membrane cures, and it just sucks up into that joint, and that's where your weak point is, under pressure, and it leaks there. It doesn't take long to go over the retaining wall area, get a bit of sand, cement, mortar, or a bit of a render mix, add a bit of 11Y in there, and just flush off all the joints. Get all the daggy bits off first, all the snotty mortar bits first, and any voids, fill them. Just flush them off. And the advantage of the C1P and 2P in that application is it can go over those patches even if it's still wet or damp, so it doesn't delay your job. But you need to fill the voids first because they will come unstuck. And believe me, I see this in water tanks, and it's got me staggered. Even if you're using a sheet membrane, it's not good practice to go over voids. Okay, you should still fill those voids first and ensure that they are going to be fixed and filled first before you put the membrane on it. It's good practice, and I always talk about surface prep, surface prep, surface prep. Get that piece right. Don't come and tell us as well, which is the thing we hear sometimes from builders and others that have a go on site, particularly with retaining walls. It's going to be covered over in the waterproofing, so it doesn't matter if the wall's not smooth. Nonsense is total bullshit. Get it right, because that's where you're going to come unstuck. Okay, treat block walls like any other substrate, because like I said before, these applications, retaining walls, planter boxes, water tanks, critical environments, get it right and your membrane waterproofing application keeps flowing on from there. Uniform build is still important on retaining walls, planter boxes, water tanks with these sorts of services, and that's why it's even more important to ensure that you've got those mortar joints filled. If you come across a wall that hasn't got snotty joints and you've had a brick layer there that's actually finished them off nicely with smooth joints, and you might think, oh, this is great, I can just now it goes directly over it. Be careful, because if they've been finished grooved joints, they're slightly recessed, and what happens is that still can create a shrinkage or a cracking in a membrane or a minor void. So you may need to flush those off first. If you see that on site, explain to your builder or your client. It might be an additional couple of hours work that you need to add to the quote, but get that right, because at the end of the day, it's much quicker and easier to pay that little bit extra and have that little bit of attention to detail at the start than afterwards when you've got a leaking underground wall and you may not even be able to get access there to access the membrane, and you're going to have to go in from the inside of the wall to treat it, and that's never a good way of doing it. So, porous surfaces, no primer, equals pinholes in membranes. So, like I said before, we've got a range of primers in the Gripset range. Attend to those, look at them. Our data sheets always reflect those anyway on the membranes you're using. You know, you've always got us here on our 1-800-650-435 tech number if you want, and we can help you there. Check out some of these images you're seeing now. These are the ones of rough and clean walls, how walls have been prepared properly, how they haven't been, voids in membranes caused by failures because of filling joints, etc. Attend to that, look at it, get it right, and guys, I'm telling you, and girls, I'm telling you right now, if you do this, block walls, are as simple as putting over a rendered or a rendered wall or a precast concrete wall. It just needs a little bit more attention to the surface preparation. These things are not going anywhere. They're here to stay. Many builders are still using them. I know we've spoken about Dinsel and all these other products in the past, but this is still a substrate we see often in the market. So treat it right and it'll treat you right. I'll see you in the next episode.